and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Wow, what a week of epic proportions. If this week were a movie, I'd name it 2 obituaries, a controversy, and a book launch. And it doesn't even begin to cover all that has happened this week. It is true that leader of Afenifere and elder statesman, Pa Ayo Adebanjo, passed on last week Friday. However, given how very quickly pandemic leader Pa Edwin Clark followed suit, they will always be remembered together. Both of them fierce advocates for true federalism and restructuring. Now, while the nation was coming to terms with their loss and its attendant consequences, a much-anticipated autobiography of former military head of state, General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, was launched right here in Abuja. It was a roll call of the former heads of state still alive, as well as President Bola Tinubu, who gave the final word at the event. Former Vice President Professor Yemi Oshibajo, the book reviewer, described the book as an important one, saying it's not just the story of the ex-head of state, but that of Nigeria. Complex, sometimes unpredictable, sometimes stranger than fiction, but always fascinating. But as many readers of the book have asked, will readers be satisfied with the explanations provided by Babangida for some of the very consequential decisions he took as head of state, some of which he admits shook this country to its very foundation? Majeed Dahiru, a columnist and technical team member of the Lux Terra Leadership Foundation, is our guest tonight. Majeed, Happy New Year to you.
I wish you the same.
I don't know whether you were surprised. Looking in the room yesterday at the Hilton, were you surprised at the caliber of leaders, that gathered together? I mean, I'm still looking for the collective noun to describe all of the leaders that were in that room. But were you surprised that some were there and some weren't?
I wasn't surprised. President Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida was, of course, one of Nigeria's most consequential leaders in our entire history as a nation. And his time in power, his legacy can be defined as one that is both good and bad, and sometimes ugly. So, for such a maverick, an enigma of some sort, you would expect that he's going to attract an armada of political heavyweights.
I like that word.
For his much anticipated book launch, which also seems like one of his last act, probably one of his last public, should I say an act of public service, one of his last acts of public service, given his advanced age and the fact that this is coming 32 years after he left power. So he has decided to put down his own memoir in his own words and to convey to Nigerians some of the reasons behind the actions he took and the inactions he did not. So I think it's like a gathering of his friends, so if you like, foes, I like.
Foes?
Yeah.
So would you say there were foes there?
There are victims of course, some of his actions in power, right, which includes our president and some of his associates. But maybe because Nigeria has healed over time, and in his own words, while he may have taken certain actions to derail democracy, according to him, Nigeria survived and democracy was restored. And so truly, after 25 years of democracy, the consistent practice of democracy since 1999, and maybe time has healed some of those issues. And so, according to Sibanjo, the book launch brought the tormentors and the tormented together under one roof. And so it's an interesting time for Nigeria. And I hope that what has been put out by the former president will enrich our body of historical knowledge going forward.
Would you say, though, I mean, you just said that word, tormentor, I know I heard him say it, and, the review he did and the manner in which he delivered it, it takes a real skill, art to be able to do that without causing offense. Because you could even see people, laughing, sharing a few jokes.
In fact, the tormented person was actually laughing. I was referred to as the tormented person. And that's the current president, Bola Tinubu.
Indeed.
Yeah, Oshibajo is, of course, one of our brightest. A fine gentleman, a scholar, and a very decent man. You could see that he embodied the essence of the moment. The book itself was consolatory in tone. It's like a man seeking healing as well by putting down this memoir. So former Vice President Osinbajo, in reviewing the book, embodied, that the essence behind or what was supposed to characterize the atmosphere of such an important day. So it tells you how bright a mind he is to know, to choose the right words and be able to communicate the essence of the moment without offending anybody and actually get everybody laughing.
And it's very important. I mean, it's even more poignant because a few things which also came out in the discussions yesterday. We had former president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, whose party has just been defeated in an election. Conversations around democracy, form of government. I think I still haven't been able to remember who was saying that, former head of state wasn't just trying to govern a people. He was trying to engineer a country. And, there's still conversations around what form of governance still suits the African people the best. And that even, is even more poignant now when ECOWAS seems to be in some, I don't want to use the word disarray because ECOWAS will certainly refute that word. But when you look at the fact that their members, 3 of whom have now left, they've gone, I don't know whether rogue will be an appropriate word. I'm choosing my words very carefully as well. But clearly, they're not democracies. I mean, there was a time when military dictatorship was fashionable, but now democracy is here. They affirm that it has come to stay. However, it's still a matter of, conjecture, given just how dissatisfied people feel with what democracy has offered them.
It's because democracy has not offered much in Africa in terms of improvement in welfare and security of citizens. And that is because our democracy is not democratic enough. The best form of government remains democracy. But democracy, to be the best form of government, must be democratic in every sense of the word and must be driven by democratic citizenship, rule of law, and an atmosphere that is devoid of impunity. The problem we've had in Nigeria and most part of West Africa is that all of the elements that are supposed to drive democracy and make it thrive are actually lacking, especially when you talk about democratic citizenship. I've always made the point that a major drawback of our democracy in Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, is identity politics of ethnicity and religion. Both are colonial bastards that actually birthed the First Republic, and military rulers that also attempted to usher Nigeria into democracy failed to build a nation of citizens out of a country of tribesmen before implementing democracy as a system of government. So what you find is that people vote along their ethnic and religious lines in the quest to install ethnic champions that will go and get a slice of the national cake for the various sections of this country. I have over 1,000 of us.
So that engineering, which he spoke to, didn't quite work?
It didn't quite work because there was no sincerity of purpose. It was like taking 2 steps backward and taking 20 steps, 2 steps forward and taking 20 steps backwards by most of our leaders. They recognized the problem in some instances, but they couldn't do the work. Ghana was a bit more successful than Nigeria in this regard. And that is why they have a sustained period of democracy that seems to have even an improved electoral management system that enables citizens to at least choose or fire their political leadership at will. Now, Nigeria, for example, is having problems of a democratic system that is not democratic to the extent that we have flawed electoral processes. And if there's anything that is worse than a military regime, it's a democracy with electoral subterfuge. We have the power to truly decide does not reside in the people, but resides in a cartel that seeks to grab power for self-service and not public service. So what is even worse than what happened in Nigeria is any of the so-called West African countries that are democratic that do not conduct free and fair elections, that will enable people to freely choose who they want to lead them in times of their need for a specific kind of leadership. So we need to sit down and have a comprehensive conversation. Democracy is not to blame. We are largely to blame.
So when you look at, because right now what this was supposed to be is a reflection of the past, a reflection on the past, but also looking at, he has the privilege of seeing where we currently are. You said that it does appear that this is a man also seeking healing.
Yes.
So it's one thing to offer that apology, an accident, he says, an accident of history. And he says if he could turn back the hands of time,
he would do it differently.
He'll do it differently. He's offered that. Do you think, how would you say that Nigerians have accepted that? Okay,
well, what right is what? If a man has committed a sin and has asked for forgiveness, such a man should be forgiven. But there are lessons to be learned from it. You see, in the book he wrote about a lot of things he did right and took pride in doing those things. And of course, he acknowledged the things he didn't do quite well, including the annulment of the June 12th presidential election, which effectively botched his own transition program for Nigeria after 8 years in power. So in retrospect, the Babangida I saw yesterday would not have annulled June 12th election if he knew that today that would be a dent on his public service career. That was quite illustrious. And I'm sure that looking back, he would have wished he did much more than he did in terms of good things that were recorded in his memoir. So the lessons for our current day leaders is, look at Babangida today. And please, do not do some of the things we did in the past that he's regretting today and apologizing for. And do more of the good things he did that is taking pride on doing those things. So it's for you to now understand that a time will come in your life where you have to give account to a public service. And when you're putting that in your memoir, the question you ask yourself is, if it is weighed on a scale, will the good legacy you leave behind, will it outweigh the bad and the ugly ones? So that is what future leaders and current leaders should take as a lesson from the experience and from the life and times of General Babangida.
It's taken him, as you said, 32 years to do this. And he's not just offering this book, he's also trying to, raise funds to build a presidential library, which also happened yesterday. I know that questions around our presidential library, the only one we have, at least that I know of, maybe you tell me of another one, is the Olusegun Obasanjo Presidential Library. And I do know that even that was steeped in some controversy. Yesterday I heard President Goodluck Jonathan saying that, presidential libraries are things that we must invest in, that we must find ways to, I think he was speaking to President Tinubu on, that there must be a way to institutionalize the legacies, not just legacies, but also the time in power, the history, of service that these men, had while they were in power. What are your thoughts around that? The fact that it wasn't just a book launch, but also the launch for a presidential library.
Whatever it is that will enrich our body of history in terms of knowledge and intellectualism is a welcome development. The idea of presidential libraries, I'm sure, was copied from the United States, where most presidents retire to a presidential library that serves as a resource base for knowledge and history, particularly presidential history, well-documented times in public service, so that people can learn and unlearn from their own mistakes and their legacies. It's a good one. There's nothing wrong with it on the surface of it. And like I said, anything that will enrich our body of historical knowledge and intellectual dynamism is welcome. This is a library. We can't have enough of libraries that will serve as a resource base for researchers, for students of history, for academics, for politicians, and those that are interested in intellectual endeavor.
Even more so because, we lost two titans within days of each other. Yes. Bade Banjo, who died in 96, very strong, still very strong at 96, even when he passed. Pa Edwin Clark, never silent. If he feels very strongly on an issue, he's suddenly going to call that press conference. And I remember that one of the things that former Governor Bayelsa State, when he went to pay condolences to the family, was that we've lost a moving library, a living and breathing and moving library. And it really dawned on me then, because when you sit with elderly people, one of the first things that comes to you is their own account of history, being that these men were at the very helm of affairs.
They witnessed history.
They did. They created it.
Some of them actually participated in it.
Yeah.
And like you already pointed out, some of them created the history we're talking about today. So they should be well documented. And it's very important. In fact, we actually lack resource materials in terms of documenting independence and history in Nigeria. So that should be looked into. Chief Clark was an enigma. a statesman who fought for justice for his people in the Niger Delta and make sure he kept that struggle alive until the very last day on earth. And he was also committed to a united Nigeria where there is justice for everybody. And that was why he often advocates for restructuring, resource control, and some very progressive ideas on how to make Nigeria better. On the part of Chief Ayo Adebanjo, for me, he was a warrior.
I wonder what it would have been for someone like Adebanjo to hear IBB
Babangida's own version of why he annulled the junta.
And to even say that elections. He expresses regret over it.
Yes. Well, he's an elder statesman, or he was an elder statesman. I'm sure like most of us, we now consider the Babangida years, its ugly side, its good side, and its bad side, as part of our developmental history. And I believe that our statements would have probably considered that much. If you look at the issues surrounding the June 12 annulment, you would agree with me that Babangida has lived with this guilt for as long as we can remember, probably for 32 years. And that was why he worked hard in 1999 to make sure that power returns to the southwest. And a kinsman of Abiola was picked in the person of Olusegun Obasanjo to pacify the Yoruba nation for that loss. And he's admitted bit by bit, you could see that he regrets this action because the person involved was his friend. And when he had to put down a memoir, he actually expressed that regret. Even though, being typical of Babangida, he tried to deflect the blame again by mentioning Abacha, who is not here to defend himself, as being responsible for the annulment. But for me, that in itself is in bad taste. You've expressed regret, taking responsibility. You should not have named any other person under a military dictatorship that you headed as being responsible for any action or inaction under your government. You are a dictator.
But so, it's a memoir. If that was what transpired, shouldn't he say it?
Characteristically, and knowing the structure of military dictatorship, nobody else can actually carry out any action without the stamped authority of the head of that government. Abacha could not have annulled the June 12th presidential election, no matter how much he didn't want the election to be validated. No matter his ambition, he could only have put pressure on you to annul it. So the responsibility for that and the blame for the annulment of June 12 will still rest squarely on General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. And thankfully, he has said, if he had the opportunity, again, he would do it differently, meaning he knows that it was his responsibility. No matter the number of Abachas in the army then, it was Babangida who headed the government. He had the powers, he had what it takes to have neutralized Sani Abacha or another tendency within the armed forces that they didn't want democracy to happen in Nigeria. After all, he sanctioned the execution of his own best friend for plotting a coup against his government. I'm talking about Mambata. He took such a hard decision. That is the nature of dictatorships. They are alphas and omegas of their government, and everybody bows to them. If Babangida wanted June 12 to be validated and not truncated, nobody could have stopped it within the armed forces.
Because really, at the end of the day, you have been in a leadership institute for a while. You have looked at the topic of around leadership, and every time we talk about Nigeria and why we're where we are, everybody points at
leadership.
Do you think that we're too indulgent of our leaders?
I think we don't expect so much from them. And
we don't expect?
Yeah, I think Nigerians have over time resigned to having just the barest minimum effect of leadership in their lives. And so to that end, I think we indulge our leadership so much. And now they get away with a lot of things. Ordinarily, leadership is a serious, very serious business. And I'll tell you this, there is no decision that can be taken in any government without the president or the head of the government sanctioning it, because it is his decision. What you see by way of cabal, intervention, or interference in the run of activities of government is that these people that you call cabal understand the body language, they know the unspoken desires of the principal, so they're simply executing it. If a president wants something to be done, it will be done. In fact, our constitution gives the president such powers to be able to assert himself or herself in any way he or she deems fit. Our presidency is executive in nature, very executive. In fact, more executive than America's presidential system. And it was deliberately made for a developing democracy so that if there are tendencies that may want to pull the president left and right and derail the course of governance, the president has everything it takes, everything, to whip such people in line and sanction them accordingly.
Well, I haven't read the book, and I don't know that you have read it as well.
No, I've not read it because we've only been looking at the reviews.
Yes.
And from what we know, because some of us witnessed this history as well, from what we know is, so from that limited space, we are making some of these comments because we are witness to history as well.
Yes, because we don't know whether there was also any other external influence, you know, that could have perhaps informed his decision.
Ultimately, it was his decision. You see,
that is true.
Abraham Lincoln knew the danger in proclaiming the emancipation of African-American slaves as president. He did it, it led to a civil war, he fought the war, he unified America and died in the process. It was his decision. So if Babangida had decided to see through his transition program, nobody would have been able to derail it because he was a military dictator.
Let me take you up to another issue of leadership that happened this time around in the National Assembly, and I understand it is threatening to leave you without any representation, even though we've now been told that, oh, that is a matter dead and buried, it's been forgiven, and it's what happened on the floor of the Senate, you know, yesterday between the Senate President and Senator Natasha Akpoti, who represents Kogi Central. I don't know what your reading of the situation was, but, you know, given just what transpired and the fact that it has also happened, it seems to have happened before, even to the Senate President himself, this matter of seating arrangement, what's in a chair. Some people have said it's musical chairs. What's your reading of what transpired on the floor of the Senate? Okay,
for me, yeah, there are rules. There are rules that even govern we are members of the Senate are supposed to sit. But in applying these rules also, it must be devoid of malice or an intention to malign individuals and members of the Senate because they are all elected by their constituents to be a voice in that very important arm of government. So while senators are expected to obey the rules of the Senate, the leadership of the Senate is also not expected to use those rules or misuse these rules in ways and manner may come across as trying to malign individual members of the Senate. So I think Senator Natasha felt maligned in the way the rules are being applied, and why the Senate President also felt that she was recalcitrant in not obeying the rules. So I think they need to sit down at their behind closed door and resolve this matter because I understand that both of them have enjoyed very good relationships in the past, and I think as friends, as colleagues, they should be able to manage whatever differences they have without allowing to interfere with the running of the business of plenary during a Senate sitting. I can't help but look at it through gender lenses. And it's not just for Senator Natasha. It's been a pretty tough week for women in politics in general. Right Honorable Miranda also, you know, was having a pretty tough time at the beginning of this week as Speaker of the Lagos State House of Assembly. And, you know, crowning it with Senator Natasha's experience, you're just wondering, what exactly are women doing wrong in politics? No, I don't think this is happening because they are women. I think that it's because they are politicians. I mean, Miranda, for instance, enjoyed the support of her colleagues in the Lagos State House of Assembly, and I also suspect that she also enjoys some support from external forces that are also very influential within the party in Lagos State. It is also true that I don't know how to call him former Speaker now, Obasa, also enjoys similar support outside of the House. And if you look at the way Lagos politics works out, there are leaders that decide, you know, how the pendulum swings. So I think that the kind of support she's gotten, even from the general public, the sympathy she's gotten, I'm sure it will go a long way to influence members of the larger leadership body of the Lagos APC not to do anything that might be misconstrued as maligning a female politician. But ordinarily, I just think that this is just politics in the Nigerian fashion, where there's always a tussle for positions within, you know, even the same family members, the same political parties. So I think that I want to believe that the leadership of the APC in Lagos, the Governor's Advisory Council, the President himself is from Lagos, the Governor of Lagos, Mr. Majeed, a perfect gentleman, I'm sure they would have seen some of the reactions from the public. And Lagos being a center of excellence, would not want to be seen as practicing political tendencies that are misogynistic in nature.
I sincerely hope so. Well, we have to thank you for coming on Hard Copy.
Thank you very much for having me. Well,
that's the program tonight, but your feedback is always welcome, so please speak to us using the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Majeed.